Welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Jake Gordon and Alex Sword. We are talking the biggest threats to the University of Georgia, capturing their third consecutive national title, moving on to the ACC, where there's two clear-cut candidates and not really anyone else. It is Florida State and Clemson. What's ironic about Florida State is we're talking about them now, but in a month, we could literally be talking about how they're out of it. They play Clemson and LSU in the first 3 weeks of the season, I believe, going to Clemson, neutral site against LSU. They lose both of those games. They're out of it. They win one of those games. They have a very manageable schedule, and then they go to the ACC championship. They win that, they're in. So their season's going to be decided early, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, well, it's this is the nature of the college football playoff. If you're going to lose, you'd rather lose early. I mean, you could have two teams that lose to identical opponents by the same score. And if one of them loses in week 1 or one of them loses in week 12, people are going to be looking at that week 12 loss a lot more unfavorably than that week 1 loss. It's just kind of weird. That's just how it works. But I'm not a huge Florida State believer. I do like Jordan Travis a lot. I just don't think they're there yet. I think they're definitely on the way. But Clemson is a team that I do think is up there. I think Georgia is still, head and shoulders above Clemson. But I don't see many losses on Clemson's schedule. Maybe they lose to Notre Dame. But if they're an 11-1 team, maybe they go 12-0. I mean, they're definitely going to be in the mix, and they're definitely a tough team to play in the playoffs.
Yeah, Mike Norvell's squad. I mean, I don't know. I think the jury's still out on Norvell. I'm not quite sure. Double-digit wins last year. A ton of the defense is returning. Obviously, Jordan Travis is back. Jared Verse is going to be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. He's an edge rusher. They've got those premium positions returning, so that can't be understated. But like Chase said, the road to the college football playoff for them is a lot more difficult than Clemson's. And more so, Clemson's got the track record that you just kind of buy. You just kind of lean into the Clemson track record. I don't like Dabo personally, but you can't argue with results. I think they're returning like 4 or 5 offensive linemen, like 8 or 9 starters on the defensive side of the ball. Cade Klubnik, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, had his fair share of mistakes. There's no arguing that. But the raw talent, it's there. It's absolutely there. And when Clemson has had, that unbelievable quarterback, they're always a championship contender. I do think Florida State is serious. I think they should be taken seriously. Mike Norvell, like I said, jury's still out, so I'm not sure. I'd probably lean Clemson, but week 1's going to tell us a lot more when we see Florida State and LSU. If they get boat raced by LSU, I think we can all just assume they're not going to stand a chance against Clemson.
I have Clemson in my college football playoff. I don't know if they're one of the 4 best teams, but the ACC is one of the weakest conferences, and they get Florida State at home.
I have Clemson in the playoffs as well.
I do not buy Mike Norvell. I think last year was a fluke. I think this is typical Florida State, typical Texas. You have one good year, and everyone's hyping them up, and they go 8-5 this year.
I think they have to play Florida as well.
They have to play Florida.
Yeah, they play Florida.
For sure. I think they've got a tough
schedule.
I think they got a good chance of losing that game. One thing I want to bring up before we go to the next conference, though, about Florida State, and it's a hypothetical situation. You never really think about a 2-loss ACC school ever getting in. But there is a hypothetical where if they play Clemson and LSU close at the beginning of the year, use those games, run the table the rest of the way, and then beat Clemson in the ACC championship, I think you might have your first 2-loss team. And I don't think you expect it from the ACC, but just because the way that the schedule shakes out, as long as those games aren't blowouts, if they don't get boat raced by LSU, they lose by 2 points to LSU and then play a close game in Death Valley and then avenge that close game, I think they're in.
See, I think in that sense, it has more to do with the field. Like, let's say Ohio State. If Ohio State, it has way more to do with what happens to Ohio State, Bama, Michigan, and LSU than it does Florida State.
There's a world where you look at Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, and all 3 of those teams have 1 loss.
Yeah.
And then you look at a team like Washington, USC. Washington and USC could both be 1-loss team. But if you got 2-loss Oregon that wins the Pac-12, Texas, I think, could be a 1-loss team. Maybe there's another team in the Big 12 that surprises like every year. I think there's just going to be too much going on, and I think the ACC will just get left out again if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean
they should.
Yeah, it's definitely. I just think that's a scenario where a 2-loss team
it's definitely interesting.
It's possible.
A field, especially because I still think Georgia's the only team to come out of the SEC. I just think they beat each other up in the West, and then they lose in the SEC championship, and that's the only team. Coming up after the break, we're going to do the Big Ten.